In Chapter 1, we looked at inserting a couple of functions, the sum function and the average function. And in Chapter 2, we're going to take a look at some additional functions as well as some formulas. And as you'll see on page 37, the objectives that we're going to cover in Chapter 2 are we're going to learn how to write formulas with mathematical operators. And if you've had any kind of math class in the past, you'll be familiar with the mathematical operators that we'll use. We're also going to learn to type a formula in the formula bar. In addition, we'll learn to copy a formula from one cell to another. We'll learn to use the insert function wizard to insert a formula in a cell. And then we're going to learn some new functions here. We'll write formulas with the average function, which is not new, but then we'll look at the max, min, count, PMT, FV, date, now, and if functions. So a lot of new functions that we'll take a look at in Chapter 2. And then finally we'll look at the difference between absolute and mixed cell references. And in Chapter 1 I briefly mentioned to you the relative cell references, and we'll look at those again as well, but we'll dig a little bit deeper and look at absolute and mixed cell references. In the paragraphs at the bottom of page 37, again, as mentioned previously, we're going to look at Excel as a decision-making tool with our functions and formulas, and those types of decision-making tools are really called what-if analysis. What if a certain cell changes, the amount changes in that cell, how does that affect formulas and functions in other cells? So we'll look at that and see how Excel does that for us. On pages 38 through 40, you're going to see the model answers to each one of our projects. So if you want to review those quickly, you can, and also come back to those after we complete each project. At the bottom of page 40, they look at the mathematical operators that we'll be using in our formulas and functions, and you can read through that. They do talk about the order of operations, which again, if you've had a math class, you probably know what that is, but any numbers, any formulas that are in parentheses will be looked at first, and then it'll read the formula from left to right, and it'll look at negative numbers, percents, then exponents, and then it'll look at multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction. So that's the order of operations, and again, the parentheses will trump all of the order of operations. So whatever's in parentheses will be done first. And then at the top of page 41, you'll see in table 2.1 the actual mathematical operators that we'll be using that represent the addition, multiplication, exponents, things like that. In the middle of page 41, you're going to see some discussion there about copying a formula with relative cell references. And again, in Chapter 1, we looked at taking the average function. If you'll recall, we copied that from one cell and placed it in adjacent cells to the right. And when it copied relative to whatever column it was in, which was nice. It automatically updated the function to reflect the column that was in. And we're going to take a look at that same concept at the beginning here of Chapter 2. We're going to begin in Project 1A by opening up the file called HC Reports. And I already have that open for us right now, but that's on, again, the Student Data Disk in the Chapter 2 folder. And you'll notice there's several different parts to this worksheet, and we're going to be applying formulas and functions in a variety of cells. At the top of the worksheet, you're going to see Highland Construction, and it lists all the customers there. I'm going to assume these are sales, actual sales, planned sales, and our job is to determine what the difference between those two are. And so we're going to begin first of all by saving this workbook under a new name. And I'm going to go under the File tab, Save As, and again I've got a folder that I want to place all of the classwork in. We're going to keep the last half of the file name, but we want to start out again Excel Level 1, Chapter 2, and it's Project 1. And we'll keep the last part of the file name there. I'll go ahead and click Save. And that'll update with the new name. You can see that on the title bar. And then we're going to start in with the formula in cell D3. This is where we want the computer to calculate the difference between the actual and the planned sales. All formulas and functions, as mentioned in Chapter 1, should start with an equal sign. So I'm going to type in an equal sign. And then we want to take the planned sales, which is in cell C3, and we want to minus the actual sales, which is in cell B3. And you always want to use cell references because later on we're going to go through and make some changes here using what they call the what if analysis. What if actual sales changed? How does that affect our difference? And so we'll be using cell references so that we can use Excel to its powerful state in performing what if analysis. After you've typed in the cell references, you can either click the enter button on the formula bar or you can press enter, either one, and that gives you the 3,760. Now the remaining rows, we need to do the same thing, and if you wanted to go to each one separately and manually type those in, which D4 would be C4 minus B4. If you went to row 5, it would be C5 minus B5. You could do that on and on, but if you had 100 of those, you certainly wouldn't want to do those manually. And so we're going to take a look at a couple of different ways that you can copy formulas from one cell to another. The first method is using the fill button, and what you'll do with this is you'll include in your range of cells that you're highlighting the cell that has the formula that you're wanting to copy. So in this case it's D3, and you want to copy down through D10. And then the fill button is found on your home tab in the editing group, and then the fill button. If you click on the drop down arrow, notice you can fill down to the right, up, or left, and we want to fill down, so click on that. And now you can see in all these rows it's placed a formula in it, and depending on what row you're in, it's changed it depending or relative to whatever row it's in. So that's relative cell referencing. It changes relative to whatever row it's in. We'll go ahead and save this to update the changes that we've made. And then the what if analysis comes into play here, where let's say in B4 we want to change that particular number to 46,425. As soon as you type that in, notice the difference is automatically updated. Wherever you have a formula or a function, it'll automatically update it when you make those changes. C6, what if the planned amount for Lindstrom Enterprises changes from 61,220 to 60,000? How does that change or affect the difference? And you can see that immediately when the change is made. If you go to cell B8, again we can change that to 57,415. See immediately what the difference, how that's updated. And then in B9 they want us to change that from 12,398 to 14,115. Now if you'll notice when we entered in the formula in cell D3, it did not carry over with the formatting, and we do want to use the accounting number format. So I'm going to make sure that I'm in cell D3, and in the number group I'm going to change this to the accounting. When you do that, it adds 2 zeros to the right of decimal place. Notice that's not consistent with the other numbers, so we want to decrease the decimal. We've done this previously in Chapter 1. So that's just a review there. And then the remaining numbers are okay. Those all kind of line up and match the format that's used in columns B and C. Now, excuse me. Next we're going to jump down to the salaries of the employees of this construction company. And you'll notice each employee is listed separately there, the number of hours they've worked and the rate at which they're paid. So we want to determine how much money they get based on their rate and their hours. And in this section, this is Project 1B, we're going to take a look at not only entering in formulas again, but we want to copy that formula down to other cells, this time using a different method, using the fill handle. And we've looked at the fill handle in Chapter 1, so this should be a review, hopefully. The formula for this area, we're going to take the rate times the hours. So again, we're going to start out with an equal sign. And in this one, I'm going to use the point and click method. I'm going to point and click on the cells that we want to multiply. So I'm going to click on cell B15, and then we're going to multiply, and that's the asterisk symbol, by C15. And again, I'm just pointing and clicking in the cell that I want represented. And then I'm going to press the enter key on my keyboard. We end up with $810.25 for the first employee. And then again, we just want to fill or autofill that formula down, copy that formula down using the fill handle. So when you lay your white cross on the black square in the right corner of the active cell, it'll change to a plus sign or black cross, and then it's going to click and drag down through the last employee. And as you can see, it did copy down the formula relative to whatever row it's in. So as you click, notice the row numbers are changing. And that again is relative cell addressing. As we did previously, we can also do some what-if analysis by making changes to some of the numbers. In B16, let's say that inadvertently we entered in the wrong hours, or we've put in the wrong hours initially. Instead of 20, this individual actually had 28 hours. Notice how that automatically updates the salary area. And again, the rate, let's say for this one is $19.10, they got a raise. And then in B19, Deborah Gould, I'm going to change that from 15 to 24. So those are what ifs. What if the hours change? What if the rate goes up or down? How does that affect salary? And again, notice the formatting copied down from the first cell all the way down, and it was the accounting number format. We want to change that to the the comma style. So we're going to select D16 through D20, and then the comma style button again is in the number group. I'll just click on comma, and now that matches the formulas there on the left. And then we'll save again. I'm just going to click on the save button at the top. And in project 1C, we're going to use they suggest using the point and click method, which we've already done. So this won't be anything new. But in the next little area of the worksheet, you'll notice here that we're looking for percent of actual amounts here. We want to know what the difference, not only the difference between the actual and budget, but we want to know what the percent of change is. So again, a formula that begins in cell D25. We're going to start out with an equal sign. We're going to take the budgeted amount, divide by, which is a / B25. And this time I'm going to click on the enter button at the top. When you click on the enter button at the top, notice it keeps your active cell in the cell that you put the formula in. If you press enter, it automatically takes you to the next cell below. You'll have to practice that a little bit, but that's really the only difference between clicking the enter button on your formula bar and pressing enter. The same thing is done here. We want to copy these formulas down through D31, and you can use the fill handle, you can use your fill button. I want to show you another little trick too. If you double click on the fill handle, that automatically fills down until it reaches a blank line. So that's another method of copying a formula down. Again, it's changing. If you look at all your formulas, those formulas change relative to whatever row that you're in. And then we'll save again. At the bottom of page 43, they discuss the trace error button, and essentially that's just a smart tag button. There are a lot of different smart tags within Excel, but one of them is the trace error button. And what happens is there's a green triangle that may appear within a cell in your worksheet if you've put a formula or a function in a cell that the computer's not quite sure about. If it doesn't agree with maybe the range of cells that you've included in that formula or function, it'll put a green triangle, flag that cell, and at least have you come back and look at that cell to make sure that the formula is correct. And that green triangle is a non-printing character, non-printing symbol. It only appears on the screen as in the display. So we're going to try to get that to pop up, and then we can take a look at some of the options within the trace error button. And I'm scrolling down to the bottom portion of the worksheet. You're seeing the equipment usage report. You can kind of see the various categories within this report and all the months. It's the first half of the year. And if you'll notice, starting rows 45, 6, and 7, we're going to be calculating the percent of downtime and also calculating the January through March hours as well as the April through June hours. So the first formula that we're going to put in is the percent of downtime. Now if you look at the information above, notice total hours available is in cell B37. the hours that were actually in use was 2040. So the difference between those two would actually be your downtime. So if you took B37 minus B43, that would give you the actual hours that were down, that piece of equipment was down. We want to know the percent of downtime. So we're not just looking for hours, but we want to know the percent of time that it was down. So to do that, in cell B45, we're going to include a formula there, again, that starts out with an equal sign. And we're going to take the total hours available minus the in-use hours. And again, I'm just pointing and clicking B37 minus B43. And as I mentioned previously, if you just left that as is, that would give you the actual hours that the equipment was down. But we want to know the percentage. So we're going to put a forward slash in there and divide that by the hours, total hours available. Now, if you look at the formula, either in the cell or on the formula bar, you're going to see that with the order of operation, if you go left to right, the division would occur first. So it would take B43 divided by B37, and then take that amount, subtract that from B37, which is not what we want. We want the subtraction to be performed first and then divide by B37. So to overwrite what the order of operations is, we want to put parentheses around the subtraction portion. So I'm just adding parentheses so that it'll subtract first and then divide by the B37, and then I'll press enter, and that gives me 11%. So 11% of the time that particular piece of equipment was down. Each one of these cells for the month, they want to know what the percent is that it's down, so we're just going to fill that formula across. The other thing you can do, if you want to see the fill button being used, you can select the cell that has the formula and then also highlight the cells that you want to copy the formula to. And if you go to the fill button, this time you'll use the right option and it'll fill it to the right. So either the fill handle or the fill button, however you want to use that. And then below you'll see the March through, or January through March hours. We want to determine the total hours that the equipment was used. So again, we're going to use the sum function, which we've used in chapter 1. The sum button is up on your home tab in the editing group, and I'm just going to click on the button. Notice Excel tries to grab cells around it that has numbers, and we actually don't want that. We want the cell range that includes January through March. So we're overriding what it automatically picked up on. And then I'm going to press enter. Notice the green triangle there. It didn't like that because we grabbed a range of cells that was non-adjacent to the cell that we're in. So if you click in the cell that has the green triangle, you'll get the trace error button. Notice the tooltip says the formula in this cell refers to a range that has additional numbers adjacent to it, which it's right, but that's what we want. If you click on the drop down arrow of that, you can see the options that are in the trace error button. And the book actually suggests initially that you go to help on this error just to determine what it is that the computer is questioning, which you can certainly do this on your own. Right now I'm going to choose ignore the error because we know the range of cells that we have there is correct, B37 through D37. And the same is true for the April through June hours. We want to click on the sum button. Again, it's trying to grab numbers around it, but we want to overwrite that by choosing April through June. And then I'm going to click on the enter button. Again, we're getting a green triangle in the upper left hand corner. I'm going to click in that cell that has the green triangle, click on the trace error button. And this time I don't know if you can see all the menu or not, but we want to again ignore the error, and that removes the green triangle in the upper left hand corner. I'm going to go ahead and save this workbook again before starting project 2.